So this is your 1 minute. That's the time you take seats. What's that?
Tell me how many students are coming from next year?
Okay, thank you. And Professor Jones will now do the introduction of the keynote speakers.
Thanks, Bob. So before we get started, first I have a couple of observations. One is, Gerald Williamson commented about General Trevino's ability to communicate at the edge. But one of the things we were missing because of this digital environment, what we didn't appreciate, and if you picked up on, she's out of, I think, Fort Worth. So it's not only communicating at the edge, but in a harsh environment, because I think it's about 100 degrees out there right now, since she's sitting in her car. So you have to appreciate the totality of the technology that allowed that to happen and so smoothly. So thanks again for everybody being here today. And before we get started, I just want one more shout out to the crew in the back, the AV and the folks making this work, because this wouldn't work. Things like what you just saw wouldn't happen that smoothly. For us, it's sort of transparent. So again, thanks for all the folks and all the help. You guys are doing great work. Couple comments, and then I'm going to turn this over to Dave Berteau to lead the discussion. In an era of marked and geopolitical tensions and strategic competition, the significance of defense acquisition cannot be overstated. I think we've heard that a lot. We all sort of know that. Nations are faced with the imperative to modernize capabilities and ensure national security to deter our adversaries. However, this is particularly challenging in an era now of peer competitors that result in potentially contested environments. So we've heard contested logistics. I think this is not going to be an easy slog ahead. So we really need to focus our attention and resources. These threats are multifaceted and constantly evolving. Processing cutting-edge military technology is essential for maintaining credible deterrent posture. And whether it's the development of advanced weapon systems, procurement of next-generation vehicles and aircraft, or capability of cyber and space capabilities, effective acquisition and the ability to lead in that acquisition process is critical. Additionally, rapid advancements in technology means that defense systems can quickly become obsolete. So we talk about building new stuff, but we don't talk as much about continuing to modernize that, not just the technology, but the people. So we have to remember that people are constantly moving through the systems also. So we have to create an environment in which we continue to educate and train our workforce, our industrial base at the leading edge of technology to be able to meet these challenges. So while the procurement process can lag behind technological developments if we let it, the reality is that we don't have the luxury to do that. We must demand that not only our acquisition warriors are technically competent in their trade craft, but that everyone in the business of defense understands and be able to influence change throughout this process. One thing that General Lozano commented on, and the whole panel commented on, was this leadership component of it. And how do you inject that leadership mentality versus compliance? So we have a compliance-oriented environment, which we have to. We have rules and laws and and policies. But we also have to remember that this is a leadership environment, it's contact sport, and it's a risk environment. So how do you inject that mindset to the all the way down to the lowest level, that foxhole, to embrace this mindset of risk, success, and leadership, not just compliance, making sure that we're keeping the trains on time. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Berteau, who will lead the panel discussion. And I want to thank him for taking that on. We again have a technological marvel going on because we'll be transmitting from around the world. So over to you, Dave.
Thank you so much, Ray. And David Berteau here. You guys are probably tired of me by now, but your calendar, your agenda says that you'll be seeing Dr. LaPlante and Ms. Hsu, the undersecretaries respectively of Acquisition and Sustainment and Research and Engineering. Both of them have been pulled away by higher demands, among other things, to get you the money so you can continue doing your jobs next year, which I highly applaud them for doing. But we've got a way better panel for you here this morning. Here's how we're going to do it. I'm going to have a discussion first with Honorable Cara Abercrombie. She's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. We're going to talk until about 9:40. Then we're going to bid her farewell and swap off. And joining me on the stage will be the performing the duties of, the titles just really baffle me, the PDTO of Assistant Secretary for Critical Technologies, Maynard Holliday, who actually was sitting up here yesterday, and we're going to spend some time exploring this. I just want to mention one thing. You know, I've spent a lifetime in defense acquisition, but for the last little over 8 years now at the Professional Services Council, I've been paying attention to the acquisition process of the rest of the federal government. There's as many contract dollars in services contracts from the civilian agencies as there is from DOD. Let me tell you, if you need enthusiasm and optimism about defense acquisition, go look at the other agencies. We are doing so much better than anybody else. It's you know, sometimes you feel like all you're doing is slowing the rate of entropy. But the reality is we're doing a lot better than that. And I think we ought to remember that, because we spent all day yesterday talking about problems, right? And we're going to spend most of the rest of the day talking about problems. Let's remember, we've got the best system there is, and it does deliver, and we need to keep it going. So that's my opening comments. And Cara, I did not plan that. That's just kind of spur of the moment there. So I want to welcome to our screen here. I don't know when you can see her. Can we bring her up on the screen? Actually, oh, she's behind me. Okay, so I can't see her, but I can see her in front of me here. This is really an adventure for us doing this hybrid thing like this. So the Honorable Cara Abercrombie is the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Acquisition. She has a long career in public service in DOD. Of course, she came to this job from the National Security Council. So I think you're going to have this unique experience of having to implement all those good ideas that you've been promulgating over the last few years, and now you're on the receiving end of that. So it'll be really interesting. So I want to welcome you. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Appreciate you taking time out. So you've been now ASD for about 2 months, I think.
That's right, Dave. Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about what you've learned and what your priorities are?
Yeah. No, thanks. And just thanks for letting me be a poor substitute for Dr. Bill LaPlante. He sends his regards to everyone there and assures me it's a fantastic conference. And I would much prefer to be in the room with all of you than sitting in a dark press room here at the Pentagon, but they've done a good job. So no, so yeah, Dave, so I've been here for 2 months in this role, and I have a long experience with the department, as you said, but I've never quite viewed it through the acquisition team lens before. And it has been eye-opening, I think, because I come from the policy world. As you rightly noted, I was well aware of sort of the litany of problems that we all can complain about all day long. But what I've really seen and why I was very excited to come into this position is acquisition is what makes the Defense Department work. I mean, we are actively every day working to get the warfighter the capability that they need. And this requires, familiarity with what industry has to offer, what the latest cutting edge technologies are, a myriad of processes and laws, and just working every single corner of the department. So it's been a real thrill to get to work with corners of the department I've not experienced before. But I'd like to share your optimism. I think we're doing a lot right. And, looking ahead, my goals in the position really are to make sure that we cement the new initiatives that were already underway before I took the helm, such as really driving capability portfolio approaches to acquisition. So that capability portfolio management, I think, is a new initiative the department's undertaken in the past couple of years that has already shown pretty remarkable results, but we need to really institutionalize that and inculcate that across the department. Similarly, we've introduced a number of new agile acquisition pathways through the adaptive acquisition framework. We're at the 5-year mark now where we can really do some assessment as to what's working, what's not. And I, as somebody who grew up in the bureaucracy, I know it can take time sometimes for new policies and initiatives to trickle down. So one of my goals right out of the gate is to really get a sense of whether the workforce fully understands and appreciates the flexibilities they've got. Has this gained traction all the way down? Do we need to do some more work on the educating? But I think the workforce is critical. The people are key. We need to make sure they've got the resources, the training, the education, and the license to take risk when they think it's appropriate. And so those are some of the goals I've got out of the gate here. I also just want to underscore, we all know the National Defense Strategy emphasizes our reliance on working with allies and partners, the criticality of that, and reducing our own obstacles to doing so, which in our world means making sure we can export capabilities to our allies and partners. And so I am committed to making sure the acquisition team is partnering with our colleagues in the policy world to look at ways we can make the foreign military sales process work better.
Well, you've given us a lot to build on there. So let me take this in a couple of different directions, and I appreciate that start. You know, the agile acquisition framework, of course, as you mentioned, is about at its 5-year point, but we still see areas where it hasn't really penetrated, and questions are why. One that really leaps to mind is the part of software and the software acquisition pathway, because if there's one thing we know that the cycle time for developing software is way faster than the cycle time for finding funding and getting it into a program, et cetera. So that cycle time is much longer. So, but the data show that we're not really using the software, we being DoD in this case, not necessarily your office, or not using this software acquisition path as wide as we should be. You know, so why might this be so, and what can we do about that?
Yeah, I think this is one of the top questions for me right now, and we're actively engaged in seeking some feedback from the services. But I will say I have heard anecdotally from program managers who've used it. They love it. They want to use it more expansively. My sense is, but we'll have to determine this, is that, again, there's a sense of a little bit of risk aversion in the system, a little bit of worry that because it moves fast, it doesn't have to check all the same boxes as the other acquisition pathways. And I do think there can often be reluctance to do that. But one of the steps we are taking is we are building out within my shop a software cadre. So that will be a team of experts who know how to use the software pathway, who know how to do the agile acquisition strategy. And we're going to make sure they are more or less a little bit of a SWAT team, if you will, that can parachute in to program offices to provide that desk side support to help walk program office teams through how to get the software pathway going effectively. But I think we are looking at rather small numbers right now, and we've got to do the forensics as to understanding, look at the data, why this isn't happening. But I suspect some of it is, it's new. It is so different from what we've done before that there's a little bit of adoption that we still got to work on.
We are seeing some signs of progress. You know, the Army issued its software modernization plan just a couple of months ago, and that's put a lot of new emphasis on that. I think both the Department of the Navy and the Department of the Air Force are having similar steps in that direction, although they may not put it out as a new memo. You know, I'm not one who believes that the biggest problem we have is there are not enough memos out there. So I think it's a pretty good idea to actually get your plans and execute them for a while. Let me step back though a little bit to what you talked about, you know, allies and partners. So I kind of want to approach this in two ways. One is, February 2022, we ended up in supporting Ukraine in what's a real war instead of a war game. And we've got some lessons learned from that are probably applicable both to Ukraine, but maybe more importantly for Indo-PACOM and other areas that also pose long-term threats. So, you know, you've had both experience at the White House and now in DOD. What are some of the lessons we can learn from those activities? I call them wars, I guess, because they actually feel like a war if you're there. What are the lessons we're learning from that in acquisition, and how do those incorporate into some of the needs for speed and results?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think this is, you know, the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion in Ukraine has been an absolute travesty, and it is terrible. I'm really proud of the way the United States government and the Defense Department in particular has stepped up to rapidly transfer capabilities to Ukraine. But we are taking every lesson we can, and there are a lot of lessons to be learned. I mean, I think on the way we're fighting wars, the evolving nature of warfare, of course, is a lesson that we're looking at. You know, use of the electromagnetic spectrum, drones, use of space, really for the first time by both sides in a conflict. All the while, we're still seeing a very heavy reliance on artillery and rockets. And so I think this has helped us think about the way of warfare going forward. But it's also brought to light real constraints in our defense industrial base, production capacity challenges, supply chain challenges, labor force challenges, and then, of course, the need to be able to move rapidly on the acquisition front. And something that I think Dr. LaPlante likes to point out quite often is interoperability challenges. Even as we've had a NATO standard, we've realized through the provision of artillery and equipment to Ukraine, you know, one country's 155 millimeter artillery is not the same as another's. And so we are learning the lesson right now that we've got to work to be much more interoperable. So, you know, I think the Ukrainians talk about working in their zoo of capabilities. We're going to try to get rid of the zoo and really have common NATO platforms. And we're also seeing collectively that the global demand is exceeding supply. So it's not just an American problem, it is an allied problem as well. So we are doing a few things to get after that. And I think we've all seen we've been leveraging our DPA authorities, and thanks to the generous support of Congress through the various supplemental acts, we've been able to invest money into the defense industrial base directly to increase our capacity. We're also, thanks to Congress, we've pursued and successfully obtained multi-year procurement authority for munitions, which sends that demand signal to industry so that they're investing their own CapEx to get production capacity up, which is tremendous. We are working with industry partners also through DPA and other means to increase the labor pool. You know, and we've really seen the return on investment. The 155 millimeter production capacity is sort of the perfect example of how we've gone from we're at 30,000 rounds per month now, which is already an increase, but we are slated to get up to 70,000 rounds a month of production by the end of the year. So another lesson learned, I would say, is contracts. Industry, you know, the contracting again is getting the demand signal, getting the rapid acquisition authority. I think the Joint Rapid Acquisition Cell, which works under the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, has been around for a long time. Helped us, as you know, with MRAPs and a number of other programs for our warfighter. I think this is the first time we've seen it in use to support a partner. And it has been a real driver of using that rapid acquisition authority, predominantly with Army, but across the services to get things on contract extremely quickly. And so it's just been really tremendous. But I think going forward, we're going to make sure that the defense production focus continues. Dr. LaPlante has been a leader with NATO partners through the Undersecretary's Ukraine Defense Contact Group. He meets regularly with his counterparts, the national armaments directors. And we're now looking at ways we can collectively expand and improve production capacity. He likes to call it production diplomacy, which is not a bad phrase. But I think we're seeing it's a requirement, and it also is a really important deterrent signal as well. If we demonstrate to the adversary that we've got the production capacity to sustain our forces through conflict, we can hopefully succeed in deterring that conflict.
Well, that's a great set of comments on that. And you look at the contact group, particularly from my perspective, from my historical perspective, what Secretary Austin has done, and Dr. LaPlante's been a key element of this in holding those 50 countries together without a structure, I mean, the structure is being built as we execute, right? And so there's
Yeah.
no NATO, in fact, that may be an advantage because you don't have to go through this whole bureaucracy to get a decision made, that the principals meet and they make a decision and they go out to execute it. It's really a very intriguing lesson learned, and it's an incredibly powerful force that's essentially Lloyd Austin created out of whole cloth, which is just phenomenal.
I've had I've had the pleasure of attending some of those sessions, and you've never seen anything like it. A room with representatives from 50 countries working collectively together to get after the problem, really putting themselves forward. It's been tremendous. It's been tremendous for the Alliance. But again, I think we've been aware of these production capacity problems for some time. We've been aware of the not quite interoperability. This is giving us an opportunity that we cannot squander to get after these problems together.
So that sort of pivots to, you mentioned earlier in your opening remarks about international allies and partners, and obviously it's been critical in responding to Ukraine, but it's also critical in other parts of the world. And some of those parts of the world, like Indo-PACOM, we don't have a NATO structure, right? So there's no institutional, or there's not the same institutional structure in place. Now you've got the new Australia, US, UK, AUKUS agreements, both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. What are some of the other potential ways in which we can actually build on the alliances and partners? Because, much of our history in DoD is we want to be able to go it alone if we have to, right? And so there's a lot of focus and requirements of what if nobody's there to help us, right? That doesn't look like the reality of the world today. And so what are the lessons you've learned, and how do they translate into your role at acquisition?
Oh, thanks. I think lessons learned on the co-production front. One thing we've seen in Ukraine is we've been able to provide supplies rapidly because there are overland ground routes. So that's been an advantage. We're able to pre-position material at U.S. bases in Germany, and it flows right across when we're ready. So we don't have that advantage. So I think I'm going to pull back and speak, I think, on behalf of the broader ANS organization. I heard mention of contested logistics earlier. That's obviously something we're looking at, and making sure we've got sustainment capacity in theater. That's been a real focus of the undersecretaries and my colleague, Assistant Secretary Lohman. But what's really important is that we're working in partnership with our allies in theater. No, we don't have NATO. We've traditionally had a hub and spoke set of alliances, but increasingly you're seeing those knitted together into sort of a web of allies and partners, and who are also eager to improve their capability and capacity. And so we've seen, GDP, sort of increases in GDP being allocated to defense budgets in Japan and Australia. AUKUS, of course, is the prime example, but we're looking now at really innovative co-production opportunities, looking at Australia producing artillery, co-producing with U.S. companies. We've had a tradition of co-production of the SM-3 missile with Japan. We're looking ahead to other opportunities. So again, I think we would view this as expanding the pie. From an acquisition strategy standpoint, two other points I'd add. I think we're more aware of, as we want to ensure allies and partners have the capability they need, and looking at FMS reforms, some of this is just basic communication. When we're talking with a partner about a capability they might be interested in, we don't always let them know about simple things like contracting timelines. Like if we, the United States, we a service, are about to close a major contract for a particular munition, and the allies are interested in that, it would behoove us to let them know so that they could get their order in. So we all get the benefit of a larger buy and a better price. So I think that's one area we're looking at, but also looking at working with industry on the business case for co-production. A country like Australia's military small enough that might not generate a sufficient demand signal for a production line. But if it is Australia plus a number of other countries, and I'm just using Australia as an example here, but I think those are opportunities we should be facilitating because it's in our interest to do so.
That's a great uplifting thought as well, and I think we can build on that. You're right. It's one thing to ship a helicopter or a ground vehicle across the Ukrainian Polish border to repair it. It's another thing to bring it back from across 6,000 miles of Pacific Ocean. So building that capability on the other side makes a lot of sense there. One last question in terms of what is in your portfolio. You've inherited a whole effort on portfolio management, and this, I think, is a new way of thinking from an OSD point of view of OSD's role in the DoD acquisition process. How are you doing there? I think you've got some pilots underway. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think this is the most exciting area of work right now, from my perspective. And again, I give the department credit. They were moving down this path already, and I think my job is to not screw it up. But we created just over a year ago a new DASD office for acquisition, interoperability, and integration, is basically our lead for doing this portfolio management work in A&S. And what we're trying to do is we're looking at portfolios basically from the perspective of the kill chain. What capabilities do we need to close the kill chain across the joint force? And so looking at what's on the, what are the programs of record? Where are the gaps? And we're taking an integrated approach, bringing together, the resource, the requirements folks and the R&E folks and the policy folks through integrated acquisition portfolio reviews. That's one mechanism. So you bring everyone together to look at the kill chain. And we're also, the pilots are the competitive advantage pathways. But again, looking at the kill chain, what we're finding is, it's oftentimes the lower ACAP programs that are the linchpin that are not, they don't cross the funding threshold. So folks in A&S would not typically see these programs. But as you look from a portfolio perspective at how multiple capabilities knit together to close a kill chain, you realize, aha, it's this relatively inexpensive thing that's the gap, and how do we get after it? So it's been hugely insightful. That we've had a couple of sprints on the competitive advantage pathways, and we've had quite a few successes now. But from the IAPR perspective, knitting things together, we're looking at the CJAD C2 effort. The Joint Fires Network is the sort of case study there that we're working on very closely. But we're also looking at making sure services don't have to reinvent the wheel. So when we come together and look at a portfolio of capabilities, we're realizing, maybe Army was going to be looking for a particular receiver that it turns out the Navy already had, and it just required painting it tan and, figuring out how to mount it on a truck that made it operable. And, it's not rocket science. It seems so obvious. But if you didn't create the forum to bring together the different stakeholders in this way to work together jointly on a joint problem set, you might not have, come to these conclusions. And through these series of pilots, we've literally, in some instances, shaved 2 to 4 years off the acquisition process for services to get a capability right in the hands of the warfighter. So I'm really excited about it. We've got to institutionalize. The good news is, we are not alone in this. We have real partnership. The joint staff is embracing this. We're working in partnership with R&E. And so what you're seeing is we're doing these efforts in parallel, and we're fully synchronizing the full acquisition process.
That's good news, and I really appreciate that. Time is kind of our most precious resource, and it's the one that over which we have the least control. So being able to speed things up in that way and integrate them better. We're getting close to the end of our time here. I want to go back to what you said at the beginning about this symposium that's going on. It's just, I think, 20th or 21st year. I've been to many of them over the years. And you're right, this is a great place to be. It's something you can take advantage of. I want to put in a plug both for the Naval Postgraduate School and the research capability they have with actual warriors who are here getting an education and doing that. I've gotten a lot of advantage out of it over the years, and I know Dr. LaPlante has as well. And you've also, I just want you to know, you've got some staff out here representing you as well. Mark Crisco is here pushing the data front very well. Jim Miller is here on the DAU side. There's others as well I probably left out, but I've spent a good bit of time with them out here as well. So you're very well represented out here. We look forward to seeing you here next year where you're sitting up on the stage instead of on the screen. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm round of thanks for Assistant Secretary Abercrombie. Now we're going to switch gears. We'll bid you farewell, and I will ask to join me up on this table here, Maynard Holliday. Here comes Maynard. So Maynard is now filling in for Undersecretary Hsu. You notice how we do this in real, this is almost like portfolio management in real time on the stage here. With Maynard, we're going to actually take questions from the floor. We've got a couple already, but I want to open up, Maynard, by thanking you for, I think you didn't leave the stage here yesterday knowing that you'd be back up here today, but we're really grateful for you to do that. And I want to open up. Well, first of all, I'll give you the chance to make any opening remarks you want, and then I'll delve into grilling you.
All right, thanks,
asking
Dave.
you some questions.
Thanks, David. So I will not pretend to Represent Honorable Shu. I will not be speaking on her behalf. I will be talking from the perspective of critical technologies with the R&E umbrella. And so David and I talked earlier this morning about the topics we'll discuss about how we get successful transitions, and the two specific use cases we'll go into.
That's perfect. That's perfect. So Maynard, you touched yesterday on success stories. I think you had the number 300 or 310 or something like that on your slide. We're not gonna have time to go through them all, and we're probably not clear to go through any of them, but at least not in this room. But I do think that what I'd love to know more about and get your sense of, is there a process here that's making sense, that's evolving, or we're still kind of doing it one at a time, and could give us some illustrations of that?
So it's both. The late great Secretary Ash Carter, had a vision that he was able to implement. The Defense Digital Service, the Defense Innovation Unit, which I was involved in standing up. He had been thinking about these structures for a long time, because he had almost every tech job in the Pentagon. And I recall when he would talk to my boss, Secretary Kendall, he would be like, "Yep, I had that job, and so one of the things that got institutionalized was getting areas of innovation, first Silicon Valley, but then Austin, and then Route 128 in Boston. And then, when Mike Brown was DIU director, the Midwest came on board. But the vision was to impedance match the rate of innovation of industry with military problem sets. And so we have successfully done that. We could obviously be doing more of that. And then going backwards in time, when we had, the Iraq conflict, we rushed to a point, the Predator drone program, that we operationalized that really quickly, and didn't take advantage of bringing down the cost. But fast forward to Replicator, where we're talking about attritable assets now. So it's a little bit of both, and we can discuss the sail drone example if you want.
Let's see. I think it is worth talking a little bit about sail drone. One of the dynamics that we've had, and you could see it in Secretary Abercrombie's comments about Ukraine, you can see it certainly in Iraq, et cetera. It's one thing to do testing and evaluation and program development in a theoretical world. It's another thing where you've actually, it's a different kind of live fire testing when somebody on the other side is actually shooting at you, as opposed to you shooting at yourself. Right? So there's a bit of a different reality there. But let's go back to the sail drone example, because I think it's both a good example of finding capability that you may not have had a requirement for it when you started out here, right? So how do you get to actually buying something and using it in that circumstance?
Yeah. So for those of you not familiar, Sail Drone, company out of Alameda, up in the Bay Area. They're at the old Alameda Naval Air Station, and they venture funded. Eric Schmidt, the first chairman of the Defense Innovation Board, early investor, and as he was in that DIB role, he brought it to our office's attention, because it was initially funded to do NOAA climate research, looking at sea state and ocean temperatures, and it uses, wind and solar power to navigate and and to power itself and can withstand, really strong sea states and maintain its capability on the surface. So one of the things, when they showed us this capability, and Secretary Kendall said, let's do an analysis of how many sail drones we could put in the Western Pacific as persistent ISR platforms to reduce the load and requirements for manned systems on surface. And so when we did that calculation, there was like an aha moment, being able to, have force multiplication and, persistent ISR, over long periods of time, that we said we need this capability. And so Sail Drone was able to, make the case, and it's now, and for the Navy personnel in the room, you may be familiar with Task Force 59 out of Bahrain. So that's a platform that's being tested right now, in theater for that purpose. And, so it's not only Western Pacific, but, the Mideast theater as well.
I co-led the first assessment for DoD of the force posture needed for the pivot to Asia back about 12 years ago. And our touchstone was, A, we need to know everything, and B, even if we don't know everything, we need the Chinese to think we know everything. And so complicating Chinese thinking is a side benefit of that kind of an ISR fleet that comes out of that. And it's really interesting to see how that comes into play. So it didn't come through the normal acquisition process, really. It came through a diversion there. You've got responsibility for the 14 critical technologies. And actually, I want to applaud you and Ms. Hsu for this, because you've had way more stability in that list of 14 than the previous group had. They kept adding some and taking some off and changing the names, et cetera. That stability, I think, helps. But as I look at that list of critical technologies, I sort of mentally sort them into two categories. Those that are going to evolve into a program of record or a series of programs of record, hypersonics. You can't retrofit hypersonics into an existing airframe, at least not for more than one flight. But some of them are actually enablers for maybe almost everything, right? If you look at quantum, you look at AI, you look at autonomy, you look at advanced computing. These are things that are not going to be one program, but hopefully fit everything. How do you approach those differently than the ones that are going to become a program of record?
Well, first recognizing that they do cross-cut. So microelectronics, as I said yesterday, is in all of our systems. Commercial sector is moving faster. They're at a more advanced technology node. What we are recognizing, and this is not new to this room, is that the DoD demand signal is niche. We don't, consume commercially, relevant quantities of state-of-the-art chips, and so we've come up with programs to be able to manufacture in plain sight, if you will, so that these systems can't be reverse engineered. And so we have these microelectronics commons that I mentioned yesterday that bring, reshore packaging and test and other critical, steps in the process. And then also, being able to, look, do horizon scanning for, new technologies. So there's quantum, which is doing, the low-hanging fruit is sensing there. We're nowhere near a cryptologically relevant computer, but, we have to, be able to, assess, those capabilities. And as I said yesterday, the Australians are, out, leading that effort for us.
Let me encourage you to write your questions and get them down. And I should pause here a moment. I did get 3 very good questions for Secretary Abercrombie. One of them I kind of raised about, although I didn't go straight to how do you connect NPS students to production diplomacy, but I will raise that with her when I see her. And she is aware of Project Diana. Obviously, it comes out of R&E, but she's on top of that and was actually even before she got there. So I'll follow up with that as well. And I think the third one was on portfolio management. And I appreciate the sentiment of, are we doing the easy ones and leaving the hard ones later? But, and actually, I think that came up yesterday in at least 2 panel discussions. So we'll bring that up with her as well. But I'll follow up with her on all 3 of those. But back to you, Maynard. Let's talk a little bit more about AI,
Yes.
right, and generative AI. We are, those of us in the contractor community are looking at this and saying, okay, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know how it's going to, and I don't know what the customer wants to do, right? You guys obviously have the responsibility to at least think about those questions and maybe answer them. But at the same time, you got to figure out how to move the capability further. Right? So how do we approach that in DoD?
Yeah, so big issue, obviously, with the advent of these, large language models. And so we're talking to, OpenAI, Anthropic, AWS, Microsoft almost weekly about their approach to generative AI. And we recognize at the department, we are awash in data, and for it to be useful for us, we're going to have to label our own data and train our own models. So we're never going to be using ChatGPT or any other commercial system that's not trained on our bespoke data. And so we want to, eliminate to the extent possible hallucinations that you've heard so much about. And we've, like I said, talked to these companies, and they recognize that we are going to have our own, air-gapped system, similar to what the IC has, with AWS. And one of the things, some of these companies have said, look, we don't want to work in kinetic operations, and so we're trying to define, well, what are you willing to work on? And so one of the initial things we're talking about is having a model trained on the DFAR, so that we're able to ask natural language questions of the large language model that's trained on the DFAR to answer questions that you acquisition professionals may have, because right now it's soul crushing work to understand the DFAR and if this is applicable or this is legal or not. And so that's one of the initial things that we're looking at doing.
All right, we're getting some really interesting questions here, but let me ask you guys a question. Raise your hand if you have actually used a generative AI option. Okay. A lot of hands going up. How many of you found it to be perfect? Right. Not a lot of hands going up. In fact, 0, which is a predictable number in this regard. So we still have a ways to go. I've mentioned to government contracts folks, what are you going to do when you get 3,500 proposals all generated by ChatGPT? Well, you better get ChatGPT to help you evaluate them. And I'm a little bit nervous about using generative AI in the evaluation process and contract solicitation award. That's a subject, by the way, for research, and I'd be happy to talk to any potential researcher here about where to go with that going forward. All right, so I've got a number of questions here, Maynard,
Sure.
that I'll read through here as they've come in. First one, you mentioned replicator. So what are we going to see near term, and will there be some kind of disruptive system coming out of this, or is it?
Well, it's going to be several platforms, maritime, and also air. You're going to see the instantiation of man-machine teaming with platforms, and I think the Tranche 1 performers have been announced. And so I don't want to get out ahead. I mean, I know who they are, but hopefully they
Yeah,
have they
The
been-
names have not been out. You don't need to, you don't need
Okay.
to
I don't want to
get ahead of your deputy secretary yet on that.
Yeah,
It's a
so.
good way to end your career quickly.
So there'll be some familiar names, and then not so familiar names that will be named. And R&E has vetted a lot of those technologies through the Radar program, that my peer ASD Shotgun Browning runs. And so if you do some homework as to what's been done in the Radar program, you'll see some of the platforms in that program.
Let me step back to a higher level here, and you and I talked about this earlier. A lot of the places you're drawing from in drones, in AI, et cetera, are companies that actually have a substantial commercial potential market as well as a defense market. Merging those two together, we've got a couple of questions here about that. It has always been a little difficult, right? You go to a company that's commercial and say, we'd love for you to do business with us. All you have to do is keep current, accurate cost and pricing data for every item that goes into your thing. You've got to keep time charging rules. That it's fine as long as you don't break them. But if you do, it's $10,000 in a year in jail for every instance of a time charge violation. We'll let you sell to other countries. You've got to apply for a license first. We almost always say yes, but it takes 3 or 4 years. And oh, by the way, we cap your profit so that you won't be able to make much money off it. But we're great to do business with otherwise. Now, I'm oversimplifying and I'm emphasizing the negative there, but there is an element of reality in that. So how do we mesh these two together of technology that has value to DoD, but also has value to the commercial marketplace? And so how do you approach that at least? How do you think about that? And what do you say to them? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think that probably comes up more than once.
Yeah, so when we were standing up DIU, I asked my former Silicon Valley colleagues, what would, bring you in? And so DIU addresses, most of these issues about time to contract. So, the goal there is, 60 days at most to get companies on contract. And then, as David, you and I were talking about earlier, access to our test ranges, both virtual and physical, is an attractant. And then I didn't know this until I started researching it, but being able to jump companies to the front of the patent and trademark line if they were developing a technology of acute need to the DoD. So that gives companies first mover advantage in a market. And then what we've seen with the VCs is if they see a demand signal from the government, VCs are more likely to invest on the commercial side and more recently on the government side to increase their capabilities so that they can meet our demand. And then, as I was saying yesterday, there are companies now that are providing manufacturing as a service. And I was talking to one of the gentlemen who asked me a question yesterday in one of the panels about companies I've seen now that are doing additive as a service. I mentioned Hadrian yesterday that is doing CNC as a service. So that will help companies do, bridge, one or more valleys of death if and when they get that demand signal for increased scale.
Maynard, this whole idea of as a service, of course, is something near and dear to my heart. My trade association, Services is our middle name. And when I first came into DoD, services were essentially, post-campus station facilities repair and maintenance and maybe stuff that the depots did on sustainment. But increasingly, we see a world where the boundary between a product and a service has disappeared. It's really very fuzzy. I mean, the government's buying a lot of things now as a service we used to buy as a product. We send astronauts to the ISS, which the government still owns the ISS, but they don't own the suits that the astronauts are wearing. That comes with the package, right? So there's a lot, I used to use when I ran the Defense Manpower Data Center, we hosted our data on the mainframe computers here at the Navy Postgraduate School. It was a very interesting deal. They let us do it in exchange for which we would keep their money alive through OpNav, OMB, OSD, Comptroller, and OMB and the appropriators, and they'd get to keep the servers running. I don't know if that's still a good deal or not, but it was a good deal when I was doing that. Now, I have no idea where my data are. I can't go visit my server farm. I mean, the cloud's on the ground somewhere, but I don't know where. And it may be in multiple places everywhere. So that whole boundary between products and services, I think, is really key as you're looking into this. We only have a couple minutes left, and I want to do two things. Number one is we actually have a representative from DIU in the audience here, and she may have a slightly different answer or expanded answer to a couple of those questions. You mind if I give her a minute to say
go ahead.
something there? Oh, right. I realize my name tag is with you. Why don't you give me mine and you can have yours, and that way the history won't confuse us, at least if they watch it all the way to the end of the show. Go ahead. All right.
Yeah, thank you. So just following up, we have some late breaking news on the replicator program, and I just thought that I would share that Deputy Secretary Hicks did release an announcement a few days ago. I think it was this week about the first tranche of replicators. So I would search for that online. It's available publicly. DIU has also released this week an FAQ about replicator on our website. And so just to provide additional context for the replicator question. Thank you.
That's fantastic. I remember my first visit to the F-35 plant. I suggested to the manufacturer that, they've got the technical capability to manage a fleet of drones out of one airplane. And that went over like a lead balloon because that mean they'd sell a lot fewer airplanes. And so it wasn't very attractive to them. But we may be evolving that way after all.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely necessary to keep the warfighter, out of harm's way and have, these systems, query the enemy's, radars and surface to air missiles and, other capabilities. And I am actively simulating those capabilities, in my office, because when the balloon goes up, as they like to say, and we have hypersonics in the mix, the first shot, will be human controlled, but the engagement has to be at machine speed, just because of the time to react. And so that's why we're looking at AI as, to battle manage, the conflict. We have weapons that are engaging targets at the speed of light, that need to have fluence on target for several seconds to disrupt the airstream or to dazzle the seeker, and then move on to the next target. And so all those things happen in a time critical manner that really only a machine can do.
It occurs to me, and this is another research project that would take a whole team to do. I first came to DOD in the middle of the quantity quality fight, John Boyd and Chuck Spinney and Tom Christie and the rest, F-16s versus F-15s. It may be that it's actually not an either or in a trade space. We may be moving to the point where we can actually have both quantity and quality and scale it. I'd love for somebody to take that one on. I mean, this has been an age-old fight long before that. The whole design of the 6 frigates in the 1790s was to find that split between ships of the line and frigates. And we kind of got a super frigate that could outshoot any other frigates and outrun any ships through the line. So it was really a natural break there. And that's how we solved the quantity versus quality in 1790s. But it's a problem, and you may be on the cusp of fixing that, which is really exciting to me. Maynard, I want to ask you one last question, then we'll transition out because we're standing between these folks and another cup of coffee or two. But you talked yesterday about transition, right? And I was struck, and somebody just asked this question there. How do you define transition, and does it actually have measurable endpoints, or is it an everlasting process?
Yeah, so I'd still say how the NDS or the NDAA is defining it for us is to the warfighter, to our sister organization, ANS, who you just heard from, and/or to the Defense Industrial Base. And so that's how we're reporting it. But as you heard yesterday, there are groups out there that are looking at, at metrics, program of record. Is it, in, combatant command? Is it in multiple combatant commands? And so we're open to, exploring metrics, to hold us accountable. And I'm absolutely, open to that and hope, we can incorporate those, going forward. But the Section 217 report that I mentioned yesterday, that we've done for FY 21 and 22, and 23 is currently in coordination, looks at it in that way.
Let me ask you on that report. I know I said that would be my last question, but it's not. That report, is that made publicly available by DoD, or do you just give it to Congress?
So we give it to Congress, and if you have a CAC, you can get it, and then if you ask me, you can get it.
All right. I know that when I was in DoD, our general rule was once we give it to Congress, it's up to them if they want to release it, except we didn't follow that rule when we didn't want to. So if we wanted it out, we'd put it out. If we didn't want it out, we'd say go to Congress, which doesn't have enough Xerox machines.
Yeah, I mean, we have a good story to tell.
Exactly, and we really ought to get that story out. So,
Yeah.
Bob, I have a suggestion. There's a couple questions here that's a good suggestion for next year's topics. One is what's the in-house organic capability on RDT&E for DoD, and how does that incorporate in this? We don't have time to go into this now, but it's a great question. By the way, you could ask that same question on the contested logistics side. It's really the depots play at air, sea, and land play an enormous role here, but they're not present on the other side of the Pacific. And so there's a couple of good topics for next year's agenda, and somebody can do some research between now and then. I'll be happy to make you look good on a panel next year. Actually, I didn't say that, but I want to ask you all to join me in a real round of thanks to Maynard for filling in. And I think he woke up this morning not knowing he would do this. And Bob, I don't know what's next, but whatever it is, you can tell us.
Break. So we're going to close again and form into the 3 panel rooms, and they'll start at 10:30.